what's up. Most people only know Swedish meatballs as the ones that you get at IKEA. And to be honest, those are pretty good. 6 out of 10. But of course, those are mass-produced, frozen, and not even close to what's possible with a Swedish meatball. So today, I'm gonna show you how to make comforting, rich Swedish-style meatballs from scratch, along with some deeply flavored cream gravy, a North American analog for lingonberry jam, and of course, a rustic, buttery smashed potato. To get started, I'll need one large white onion and a non-stick pan. I'll drop that on the stove over medium heat, and while I'm over here, I'll preheat my oven to 500F. For the onion, I'll go for a very small dice. This is gonna end up being inside the meatball, and I don't really want gigantic chunks of onion standing out texturally. In total, this large onion should yield me about 150 grams. Now, over at the stove, I'll throw a quick squeezer of olive oil into my preheated non-stick pan, then in goes all of my onions. Next, a strong pinch of salt, and then I'll give that a little shimmy to get things combined, and from here, I'll saute this onion for 4 to 5 minutes, or until it's slightly softened and just on the edge of taking on some color. I'll mention that most meatball recipes call for grated raw onion as opposed to cooked, and after trying it, I can say that the raw edge of the onion just doesn't really cook off, and it kind of just steams inside of the meat, so it's also weird texturally. But that's not to say that raw onion in meat isn't a cool technique. Check out my weeknight gyro recipe for proof of that. It's just not a good match for this dish. Once my onions are softened like this, I'm going to move them over to a medium bowl and then add in 200 grams of buttermilk, 1 large egg, and 200 grams of the softest, dumbest white bread you can find. A lot of recipes call for breadcrumbs here, but I find that the panade, or slurry of milk and starch that results from super fake commodity white bread, yields the softest, juiciest, and most tender meatball. The excessive amount of starch from the white bread coats the meat proteins and keeps them super moist and tender. Next, I'll jump in with a spatula and stir this until the bread is fully broken down into a paste like this. Next, I'll add in 1 pound or a half kilo of 90-10 ground beef, and then the same amount of 90-10 ground pork. I go with a blend of both meats because beef by itself is too heavy and meaty, and pork just isn't flavorful enough. Then in goes 15 grams of minced garlic, 18 grams of salt, 1 gram of ground allspice, 3 grams of white pepper. By the way, black pepper would work, but buy some white pepper. It's fun. Lastly, I'll grab a little nugget of nutmeg and my microplane, and then I'll grate in 1 to 2 grams of that. The combination of allspice, nutmeg, and white pepper form the signature flavor of Swedish meatballs, or at least in my opinion they do. If that sounds like a weird combo, it's not. Classic bratwurst usually has a very similar profile, and as you guys know, brats are sick. Now to mix this up, I'm gonna snap on some gloves so I don't get raw meat on my cameras. Then I'll jump in and fold and squeeze this mixture until it's well combined and homogeneous. A lot of recipes will caution you from over mixing your meatball farce, but those recipes just don't have enough panade in them. This one is really heavy on the wet milk bread, so don't be afraid to give this meat a little elbow greasing. And in fact, it kind of needs some extra work so that I can hold the shape of a ball in just a second. Now I'll divide this farce into 24 2-ounce meatballs. That's about 60-ish grams, give or take. And to take this from paste to ball, I'm gonna roll it in my palms a little bit and work the outside. I'll give it a toss back and forth. Basically, whatever it takes to get a tacky exterior and a nice round shape like this. Now, I'll shape the other 23 meatballs, and once I've got a whole sheet lined 6x4 with 2-ounce balls, I'm going to sear them in my preheated 500F oven. In they go, and I'll check back in 20 minutes. While those roast, I'm gonna very quickly bust out the tart fruit jelly that brings essential grip and acidity to this very rich dish. In Sweden, that would be lingonberry sauce, but in the US, lingonberries are basically non-existent. I mean, you could get some lingonberry sauce at the grocery store, but we're making this from scratch, so I sub in cranberries. By the way, lingonberries are actually known as mountain cranberries, and as far as Brian Lagerstrom is concerned, the cranberry and the lingonberry have an almost identical flavor. So to make this, I've got 340 grams or a 12-ounce bag of fresh cranberries here. I'll load those into a small saucepan, and just like lingonberries, cranberries are tart, a little bit sweet, and heavy on natural fruit pectin. That's actually what's gonna set this into a nice saucy jam. Then in goes 100 grams of water, 125 grams of sugar, and 3 grams of salt. Next, I'll drop this on the stove over medium-high heat and bring it to a simmer. Once it's there, I'll give it a stir to break things down and to dissolve the sugar fully. From there, I'll cook it down for 10 to 15 minutes. In that time, the cranberries are going to burst, releasing all of their water and pectin, and once that pectin is exposed to high heat, it's going to activate so that when it cools down in combination with sugar, it'll set. In fact, there's so much pectin in cranberries that it actually looks thick and jammy while it's still hot. From here, I'm gonna scoot this into a glass container so that I can cool it down in time for the meatballs, and for that I'll just throw it into the fridge until mealtime, which is in about 20 to 25 minutes. By the way, the meatballs are still roasting in the oven, and they've got about 10 more minutes until I need to flip them. So in the meantime, let's make a deeply flavorful, meaty cream gravy. I'll start with a heavy bottom pot and drop it on the stove over medium heat, and once it's hot, I'll add in 1 full stick of butter, or 115 grams. Once that's melted, I'll add in 75 grams of all-purpose flour to make it into a roux. A quick stir to get that combined and to work out any lumps in the flour. That'll take 30 seconds or so, and from there I'll fry this roux for another half a minute to toast the flour slightly and to cook off the raw edge. Once we're there, I'll add in 100 grams of dry white wine. As I stir it in, you can see it thickens up almost instantly, but I still need to cook off a little bit of that raw wine alcohol flavor. So 30 more seconds of stirring and cooking, then in goes 1,000 grams of fortified beef stock. What do I mean by fortified? Well, to make this stock more flavorful and full-bodied, I combined 1 whole box of boring store-bought beef stock. That's 907 grams exactly, so I'll add a splash of water to bring that closer to 1,000. Then I'll add in 2 packets of powdered gelatin to replicate the body and texture of long, slow simmered meat stock, and then 15 to 20 grams of better than bouillon roasted beef base. This stuff is super flavorful and a great tool to boost the flavor of sauces when good stock is in short supply. In that goes, then in goes my immersion blender to spin this to combine. A whisk would work too. Once the stock is in the pot, I'll give everything a stir here, and notice that it's looking a little clumpy. That's the wine roux, and it's not a problem. As this comes up to a simmer, I'm gonna keep stirring so that roux will melt without issue and then thicken the stock. About 1 to 2 minutes later, this thing's at a full ripping boil, and as you can see, it's quite a bit thicker than before, but it's not gloppy or pasty, and that's ideal. Next, I'll add in 15 grams of Dijon mustard, 25 grams of wort, and then 100 grams of heavy cream to make this a proper cream gravy. Now, quick stir to combine, and then I'll drop the heat to low and simmer this for about 10 more minutes. I want to gently reduce a little bit of the volume here and concentrate the flavor. Back at the meatballs, it's been about 25 minutes in total, and these have caught a really nice sear on the first side. As you can see when I flip one over, the area that was touching the hot sheet tray is nicely caramelized and even a little bit crusty. That part is super flavorful, so to double the amount of it that I have, I'm gonna flip over all the other meatballs and then throw this sheet tray back into the oven for 5 to 8 minutes. Again, since these are so panade heavy, we have very little risk of them drying out after being blasted with such high heat. Speaking of high heat, thanks to the sponsor of this video, Arctic Zone, for keeping my coffee running hot for many hours after I've poured it into this mug. Arctic Zone's been creating insulated products since 1986, so they know a couple things about keeping things hot or cold. Their whole mission is to create products that are better, do more, and go beyond cold retention and bring a ton of new features. Speaking of features, this Titan by Arctic Zone 36 can welded cooler is full of them. Yes, it holds 36 cans, but it also keeps ice for up to 3.5 days. It has a 100% leak-proof seal and gasket and lockdown hatch, and there's a removable leak-proof hard liner with a smart shelf. That's perfect for picnicking with a wine bottle or two, and the exterior of this cooler is rugged, waterproof, and has a molded base with pockets. It's got carry handles and a padded removable shoulder strap. I also take my morning coffee walks with their stainless tumblers. That keeps my coffee hot on the walk and for the rest of the day. So if you want to check out either of these products and my other Arctic Zone favorites, click the link in my description and you'll get 20% off your purchase with code Brian Lagerstrom. Again, that's 20% off with code Brian Lagerstrom. 5 to 8 minutes later, when I pull out these meatballs, you can see that we've got a really great sear in multiple places. Getting a sear like this on the stovetop just isn't possible with a batch of 24. You need a very large pot and a lot of patience because these meatballs are so moist that they would probably fall apart if you tried to move them around when raw. Next, I'll set aside my meat tray and then grab my gravy. This has been reducing for about 10 minutes and is now the perfect texture for this dish. It's thick and it definitely can be called gravy, but not so much that it's sticky or gluey. Perfectly saucy is how I would describe it. It also tastes super good, but it needs a touch of salt. So I'll give it a little sprink, then I'll move my meatballs into the sauce. Boop, 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 boop. Now a quick gentle stir to get these combined with the sauce, and then I'll move them back over to the stove to stay warm over very, very low heat while I quickly boil off some potatoes to serve alongside. For that, I'll combine 1,000 grams of rough chopped Yukon Gold potatoes with enough water to cover them, about 1,500 grams. Then the pot goes on the stove over high heat and I'll bring it to a simmer. From there, I'll cook these for about 15 to 20 minutes, and once the potatoes are softened but not watery mush like this, I'll take them off heat, drain the water, and then flip them back into the pot. Like I said, cooked until tender but not mushy or waterlogged. To finish, I'll drop in 1 whole stick of butter, or 115 grams, and then I'll stir this to smash things up and create a mixed texture of smooth, smashed creaminess with a little bit of potato chunks still swimming around in there. If you like your potatoes a little bit smoother, I'd say give them the old potato ricer move, but for this dish, I really like the rustic texture of a smashed. Plus, when you make your potatoes really smooth, you actually need more fat to make them taste good. After a quick taste here, these need a little bit more salt, so in goes a strong pinch, another stir to combine, and there we go. Rustic, creamy, smashed potatoes that are rich, but not a total gut bomb. Now to plate this up, I'm gonna drop down 1 very large dollop of those freshly smashed Yukon Gold potatoes, then I'll stack 4 to 6 of my meatballs on top. I'm going with exactly 5 here because Lauren said that odd numbers are prettier. Let me know in the comments if she's right. Then of course, I'll finish this with a generous dose of that silky smooth cream gravy. Then a spoonful of my tart cranberry sauce to bring some essential contrast here. And by the way, after only 20 minutes in the fridge, this stuff's set up into a really nice jammy texture. And if you're worried about having too much, the good news is that this is great on toast with butter and or will easily last until Thanksgiving if it's well covered in the fridge. You guys, Swedish meatballs are a real stick to your ribs style meal, and as the weather gets a little bit more chillsome, I can't think of a better dish to keep you comfy. It's mega rich and creamy, but balanced. The balls themselves are juicy and tender and have a subtle hint of warm spice and white pepper. They're kind of like mini meatloafs in a way, but also taste kind of like bratwursts. I really love them and I really hope you try them soon. Let's eat this thing.